Now, the lipid hypothesis, i.e. that cholesterol causes heart disease, started off many, many years ago with the observation that people with cholesterol plaques or atheroma around their eyes or in their limbs also had cholesterol accumulation in their blood vessels and got heart attacks. So it's not unfair that people thought cholesterol causes heart disease. And later on, people found that the level of cholesterol in those people's blood was also high. And then there were whole families discovered that had high levels of cholesterol in their blood that had heart disease. So this built the lipid hypothesis. And just as we know that the cholesterol in the blood can gradually leak into the blood vessel wall, make a sort of fatty streak and then organise and create disaster and thrombosis, so too, when we were discovering blood, we sort of discovered the progression. Originally, all we could do is measure cholesterol and triglyceride. And we thought, well, some people got a high cholesterol, some we don't make any sense of it. And then this guy, Fredrickson, who really invented the whole study of cholesterol and tryptosity, he looked at the blood samples from different people and found they look different. So some people, when you rest their blood, the chylomicrons, all the fat floats to the top. Others, it's sort of spaced right throughout the blood sample, and others it floats to the top and is through the bottom. Others have high cholesterol and it doesn't look turbid at all. So he described this phenotypic classification of hypercholesterolemia that many doctors still think about, even though it's 50 years on. But this sort of pointed to something going on within the blood, more than just cholesterol and triglyceride. There was something different about people's cholesterols and triglyceride. And this guy, John Goffman, the Americans invented the ultracentrifuge to separate uranium isotopes and create atomic bombs, but others tried to use it for even better uses like medicine, and they used it to separate the particles that contain the triglyceride and the cholesterol. And they found that some particles were very light or very low density lipoproteins, and some were very heavy density lipoproteins. So suddenly we had more than just cholesterol and triglyceride. We had these different lipoproteins, but we didn't really understand what they were. We understood that chylomicrons were huge and that HDL and LDL were small. So the liver makes this particle, VLDL, which is full of triglyceride. This is how we transport fat around the body most of the day. So whether you store it and put it out, or whether you make it from sugar and put it out, this is the delivery system for triglycerides in the blood. And as those triglycerides go into the tissues that should burn the triglyceride rather than store it, the particle changes. It loses its triglyceride and it becomes a higher density. It's lost the fat which floats, so it becomes a bit heavier, intermediate density particle. Now that particle can go back to the liver. Now, some people it goes back early, some people it goes back later, but it can go back to the liver through this ApoE receptor. But it can stay out and lose virtually all of its triglyceride, and then it becomes the LDL particle. And what the LDL particle should do once it's done its main job is go back to the liver. And that's what healthy LDL is. It's just part of the fat transport system. And for a lot of people on high-fat diets, where you're pushing a lot of energy through this system, it's not surprising that LDL increases because you're just putting more traffic through this system. Now, as well as the bigger particles and LDL smaller, then people started discovering this very small particle. There's an even smaller form of LDL, a more dense form of LDL. And what happens there is if you're pushing through so much triglyceride that you can't get rid of it, and this is what happens in people that don't burn fat, they're burning carbs, the fat just accumulates in their blood. That fat that stays in the blood, because of this action of a transport protein, means that the LDL just hangs around longer than it should and becomes smaller and dense, small and dense. So now this particle here can't go back to the liver. The liver doesn't want a bar of it. So the only place it can go is into the waste disposal system of the body, which is the macrophages. And so it goes into the scavenger receptor of the body. The other thing that can happen to this particle, because it hangs around so long, is it becomes oxidized. Or it can have glucose stuck to it. It's been around for so long, it's got more oxidation, more glycation. And that stuff, the macrophages love even more. So here's a patient, a 20-year-old man who had a stroke. His cholesterol level was a bit high. His triglycerides are hanging around even though he's fasting. When the triglycerides hang around, your LDL is going to become small and dense. And so when we measured his particle size, he's got lots of small dense LDL, which is a terrible thing for a 20-year-old man. That's why he had the stroke. And that's not unknown because most people, particularly young people who have strokes, have the most likely thing is this small dense LDL. Now the small dense LDL, as I said before, it gets through the vessel wall, it can be oxidised. The macrophages actually look for it and take it up and become fluffy and cause inflammation and cause the plaque. So here's the macrophage with lots of receptors to try to find rubbish or bacteria, and the scavenger receptor. And one of the things that happens, if you expose macrophages to LDL, they'll make more scavenger receptor. If you expose them to oxidized or modified LDL, they'll make even more scavenger receptor. So they love this stuff. If the lipids are oxidized in that particle, then they also make cytokines. They send messages to the rest of the body saying, there's a war going on here, lots of stuff to eat, let's all build up. So this is the source of inflammation in the plaque. If they're glycated, they're sending out messages to say to their friends, come over here, migrate to where the battle is. So there's a whole lot going in the plaque stemming from the LDL that's getting into the plaque and its oxidation and glycation. Now with diabetes is defined as diabetes because once you get a hemoglobin A1C above 6.5%, the glucose sticks to organs in the body like the kidney and the eyes, and you get eye disease and kidney disease. But before you get diabetes, there's another problem that starts off, which is cardiovascular disease. That starts not at 6.5, but at 5.5. And how severe your diabetes is determines how long your LDL hangs around. So if you've got mild pre-diabetes, which is slightly elevated LDL, the LDL will hang around a little bit longer. If you've got severe diabetes with markedly elevated triglycerides, you'll have LDL that lasts even longer and becomes even smaller and denser because of the triglyceride. So here's a 57-year-old woman, diabetic. She went off her statin because she was having success with her triglycerides. Diabetes is very poorly controlled. When she was on the statin, she had a low level of small dense particles. She went off the statin with a high triglyceride level. She's got a very, very high level of small dense particles. So unless you could control your triglycerides and prevent the small dense LDL forming, you better be on a statin because that's the only thing that can lower a small dense LDL other than your diet. So here's another graph of, the levels of small dense LDL correlate with the triglyceride level. And these levels are very low. A lot of doctors think triglycerides of 2 or 3 are okay. They're terrible. It should be under 1.5 or ideally under 1. What about chronic kidney disease is another thing that is associated with heart disease. So people with even mild chronic kidney disease have twice the rate of heart disease. Why is that? Well, LDL clearance is slower in kidney disease. It hangs around, and if there's triglycerides present, it becomes small and dense. The likelihood of having small dense LDL in kidney disease is 50-50. Half the patients with kidney disease have small dense LDL. So the presence of renal failure results in additional resistance and higher triglyceride levels. And that's how kidney disease affects things. Many years ago, this is 20 years ago, we were looking at patients with hormonal problems. They seem to have heart disease, they seem to have insulin resistance, and they have small dense LDL. And that small dense LDL in hormonal problems is related to insulin resistance and hypertriglyceridemia. And the last one that I'll mention here is a woman with thyroid disease. An underactive thyroid causes high cholesterol and heart disease. How does it do that? So here's a woman who was on replacement. Her cholesterol was high. The replacement wasn't too bad, but then she increased her thyroid hormone and she was slightly over-replaced. did these changes in her hormone status have any effect on her particles? Yes, as soon as she increased the thyroid hormone, the small dense LDL disappeared. Here's the LDL level. If you've got a low LDL or a high LDL, it doesn't really matter whether you've got a low level or a high level. If you've got a small dense LDL, which is in the highest quartile, that's when you get the heart disease. It's not LDL, it's small dense LDL that confers the risk. Lots of studies that show that. Increasing levels of small dense LDL increase risk. Increasing levels of large buoyant LDL do nothing to risk. Another study for Jean-Pierre Dupray's group, small dense LDL, increased risk. Large buoyant LDL, there's no increase in risk. If anything, there's a decrease in risk. And what predicts small dense LDL? Well, high triglycerides. Once you get above 1.5, it's odds on you've got lots of small dense LDL. You need to get below 1 to be sure you've got none. Now, what predicts the presence of small dense LDL? Does the cholesterol level predict it? No, it's hopeless. Does the triglyceride level predict it? Far better than the cholesterol level. Triglyceride divided by HDL, yes, better again. But whether I like it or not, this measure here is the best predictor of small dense LDL, which is the total cholesterol HDL ratio. Now, a lot of people don't like that ratio because that's the one the cardiology societies promote. They promote it because it works at predicting risk. They're not promoting it because they understand it, but they know that it works. They don't know what to do about it, they don't understand what it happens, but they're forced to use it. But I'm telling you, what it predicts is small dense LDL. So these ratios somehow magically predict small dense LDL. Why? Why doesn't if the triglyceride is the cause, why doesn't it predict it? And this paper here discusses that. Triglycerides are misunderstood, they're underestimated because triglycerides vary too much from day to day. Even in a patient whose triglyceride level are 0.5, it might be 1 the next day. Somebody who's 1.5 might be 2.5 the next day. They just jump around everywhere. Something that changes with triglyceride, which doesn't jump around, is the HDL level. So I say that the HDL level is a better measure of triglyceride than the triglyceride level. And that's why it works. So the reciprocal of HDL works. Now what can we do to reduce our small dense LDL? A low carbohydrate diet. Because a low carbohydrate diet lowers your triglyceride levels. And just one of the many, many studies, Jeff Volek saying that what the diet does better than anything is reduce small dense LDL and triglycerides. Cholesterol, she went onto the low carb diet. Cholesterol went from, she's a typical hyperresponder, 5 to 8. The GP's mad, get off the diet, you're going to die. But look at her triglycerides, look at her HDL, fantastic. If she wants to spend $100, which she did, to look at her LDL subtype, we could have predicted what it would be. She's got a low triglyceride and high HDL. The ratio, her total cholesterol HDL ratio was 2. I don't actually promote this because this was a waste of $100. She should have known that there was no small... Okay, so the conclusion. LDL is the natural product of lipid transport, of fat metabolism. And we are, as low-carb, high-fat eaters, we are using that system for what it was meant to be. High triglycerides lead to small dense LDL, and that's the inflammatory plaque. Small dense LDL is found in genetic diseases, acquired diseases, hormonal diseases. And it's that predicts the cardiovascular disease in those diseases. The best predictor that we currently have for small dense LDL, other than spending the $100, is the total cholesterol HDL ratio. And the way to improve all of that is through LCHF. So thank you.